Welcome to the Overcommitted Podcast, your weekly dose of real engineering conversations. I'm your host, Bethany, and I'm joined by...
Hey, I'm Erica.
We met while working on a team at GitHub and quickly realized we were all obsessed with getting better at what we do. So we decided to start this podcast to share what we've learned. We'll be talking about everything from leveling up your technical skills to navigating your professional development, all with the goal of creating a community where engineers can learn and connect. Today on Overcommitted, we're joined by Ben Balter. Ben has spent more than a decade at GitHub, starting as its first government evangelist, bringing open source to the public sector, and most recently as director of Hubber Enablement, helping thousands of Hubbers do their best remote work. Before GitHub, he was a Presidential Innovation Fellow and part of the White House's first Agile development team. He's distilled his experience into Open and Async, his new playbook for building software on remote and distributed teams. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
So excited to chat with you. We'll start off like we start off every episode. What is one thing you're currently building or obsessed with learning right now?
Right now, I've been obsessed with learning, well, actually for the past 2.5, 3 years or so, is how to write a book not using a word processor. When I first sat down to write a book, the default is you fire up Microsoft Word or LibreOffice or whatever. And it just was such a step backwards compared to what a developer experience is on a day-to-day basis, right? We spend so much time fine-tuning our craft. And so I said, what if we can take that purposefulness and bring it to prose, to writing a book? And so I am guilty of very, very much over-engineering the build pipeline for the book. I figured it's a book about software development best practices. So it's built with software development best practices. Everything's in Markdown. I have CI running on every push with thousands of tests. The print and the digital version are just built as web pages. It's just CSS using Tailwind CSS. I figured, I have decades of experience building web pages, and to build something that exists in the physical world has been a really, really exciting learning adventure for me. And then the other side that you said obsessed. I've been recently obsessed with the interplay between AI and writing, right? In software development, if you used autocomplete and ghost text to write a type signature for a function call or something, no one would think twice about that, right? That's just something that you have to do, and it's considered efficient. But when you do that same thing with prose writing, because writing is a form of expression, there's a lot that goes into play there in terms of, are you outsourcing your voice? Are you outsourcing your authenticity? And so I drew the line. I used AI heavily for editing, but not for writing. And so I mentioned I have a bunch of tests running on CI. I had tests to make sure that the chapters were balanced, that each chapter had callouts for both ICs and managers, that paragraphs were the right lengths. At one point I was convinced from reading the book so many times that I kept repeating myself. And so I had AI generate a n-gram analysis in order to determine if I use the same phrases multiple times across chapters. And so really using, probabilistic AI to build deterministic tools to aid the human in their own expression. So applying the best of software development to writing prose has been what I've been hacking on these days. I have a blog post in the works. I hope to open source all that, of course, and share with the world how I did that.
I'm so interested to read more about that. I think that's been such a hot issue with AI in general is Windows like creativity end and AI. How does that tap into it? Is it still yours if you use AI at all? So I am really excited to hear more about your process, and I think we all are looking to learn on the best practices as AI just changes so rapidly.
Yeah, one of my favorite aha moments was I hate cliches. I'm allergic to cliches in my writing. And so I wanted to make sure that I had a CI job that made sure that there were no cliches anywhere in my writing. And I started coming up with cliches myself that I found myself writing. And I said, wait a minute, you know who's really good at coming up with cliches? AI. And so I just had AI generate a list of its own cliches that it normally falls back to, and then built a CI around that. And so finding ways to augment your voice rather than to replace it.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned you talk a lot about open source in your book. You talk a ton about open source and how people work in the open, and uh, developing this through watching that process. I was shocked when I was reading the end. I think it was your author bio that I didn't even realize you had a law degree and a business degree, and you didn't necessarily come from CS. So I'm really curious, how did you find your way into open source and learning about this field?
Yeah, so I was sitting in the back row of law school. I was not paying attention to whatever the lesson of the day was. And I was really falling in love with open source. Specifically, I was learning PHP, I was learning WordPress. At the time, I became a core contributor and did a Google Summer of Code project, found myself building websites for campus organizations. And the plan was still always to become a lawyer, like the traditional white shoe law firm path. And I entered a really tough job market, not too dissimilar from the job market today. And a buddy of mine, who was not in tech at all, I had no plan on getting into tech, was like, "Hey, you do computer stuff on the side. Like, why don't you apply for a job doing computer stuff?" And it just literally never occurred to me that I could turn my passion into a profession. And so the next day, I applied for a job at the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, in their, what they called at the time, this is how old I am, new media department, which was what the website was considered at the time, and just fell into this path of using government procurement in order to modernize government software. And I kept finding myself that a lot of the playbooks I was looking to was just saying, hey, how did the open source community solve this problem? And how can we adapt that to government? And so originally it was using open data, publishing out the government's data on GitHub as the Trojan horse to really pull governments into open source. Um, and what really came down to me is that the code was never the point, right? It was always about solving problems, right? The code is the easy part. AI makes that even easier today. And so whether it's legal code or computer code, it's just a means to solving otherwise unsolved problems for collaboration. And so kind of fell into it by accident, but it's been a really great experience since, and I wouldn't do it any other way.
Um, I think that backgrounds are so important to contributing to software and the software field. Do you ever find your like legal business brain showing up in your in how you think about software, or even how you think about open and async work?
Yeah, so the first is the fun flex that I get to do, where I used to be in the trust and safety space, which overlaps with legal a lot and compliance and regulatory. And there's a lot of FUD, a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, a lot of lore about what you can and can't do. And it's a lot of fun to be the only lawyer in the meeting and to be like, "Oh, are you a lawyer? Because I am, and I think we can do this." And in order to get code across the line, but more seriously. Constantly, I think about it. For me, and I actually worried about this in the book that I over-indexed on this. Law is about writing. Law is writing first. It's async. It's precedence-based, right? Like one court makes a decision and then another court references it. That's that decision record. It's cited. It's reviewable for years. That's just Git history as a legal institution. I think they're really one and the same. And so thinking about how to apply that idea of proof, of jurisprudence, of having a canonical record that you can point to, and applying that to obviously much less important decisions in terms of like ADRs, architectural decision records, or why a pull request landed the way it did. I think they're one and the same.
Yeah, it's interesting because even within the software development world, I have personally come up against people who either like want a more closed culture or like won't put their thoughts into writing. Um, and yeah, I'm kind of curious how you you approach that as somebody maybe wanting to affect a cultural change. Like when is it appropriate to advocate for it? And then how do you advocate for it as somebody who might want to introduce some of these more open practices?
Yeah, great question. I see transparency has two flavors or two cultures. The first is transparency as a liability. that if I write something down, you might hold that against me. You might judge me for that. Going back to the legal question, you see that a lot of like lawyers not wanting to put something in writing because it could show up in court. And there's kind of the court of corporate opinion, if you want to call it that, in terms of I wrote this thing down and now someone's going to think that I'm wrong, or they'll use it against me in some way. The flip side of that is transparency as an asset, where you're putting yourself out there, you're building a name for yourself, you're building a reputation for yourself, you're helping others to opt in to join you, to collaborate with you, making sure that they're not repeating themselves, and you're working loudly so that others can see what you're doing. And if there is that potential liability, that potential conflict, you're not catching a stakeholder by surprise at the end. They're going to find out eventually. And so rather than doing a giant flip the switch kind of magic trick reveal, to be working along the way transparently so others can see what you're doing, more often than not, they're just going to ignore you. They're busy. They have their own things on their minds. But for that one time in 10, when someone sees it and says, hey, I saw you're working on X. Have you considered Y? Or I don't think we can do that. Catching those problems earlier on where they're easier to correct is the power of transparency. And it's just a matter of leading through example, showing the easier way to do things. If you can make it easier to work transparently, other people can see that. They can see the benefit of that. And you're not going around with a top-down, thou shalt work transparently fiat mandate, but just showing people the better way to do things and the benefit of doing things just through the way you work. And honestly, just making them jealous, right? Making them say like, hey, how are you able to do that? How do you get there? And being able to point to the URL or the whatever, and then they get that aha moment.
Yeah, I've definitely had both of those experiences where I've benefited from learning from engineers that I've worked with who are really good at this, of documenting their thought process and critically documenting what is fully decided versus still kind of in draft too. Like, sometimes it helps to get around that feeling of, like, I don't want to put this down in writing, to sort of like say it up front of like, this is still a guess. Like, I'm still not fully sure that this is true, or like, I'm still investigating, but like, as of this point, this is what I know to be true. And this is kind of what I've found. So yeah, I've definitely benefited from learning from engineers who do that really well. Um, and then also kind of what you said of asking people to kind of do the things that you're hoping for too, of, hey, could I get that in writing, or can I get an issue for that? Could I get a link for that? And just kind of like helping people build the habit through um sort of a request and suggestion path. Um I haven't as of yet had too much pushback on that, which is lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, I go back to early in GitHub's history before we had managers. GitHub's engineering culture grew out of open source culture, right? And it ran like an open source project before inner source was really an established concept. And what I mean by that is I had an idea my first week, going back to government. It was about getting GeoJSON data, mapping data from government agencies onto GitHub. I bumped into someone at headquarters during my onboarding. We came up with the idea. There wasn't a product review session. There wasn't a roadmap meeting. If you had an idea in early GitHub, you had to go around and you had to pitch it. You had to build a coalition. If you needed a designer, you needed to convince a designer that it was something worth doing. If you needed a back-end engineer, whatever it was, a marketer. And so that idea of kind of building a coalition around ideas has really stuck with me, even as GitHub grew, and we did have those more formal ceremonies around greenlighting projects. And to your point of hedging when something is early and setting expectations that it's not a finished product yet. One habit that I picked up from a different leader at GitHub was when you're in the early ideation stage, oftentimes that takes place in a Google Doc or a O365 file. I would have a standard template for a header that I would put at the top of every file that I'd share around. My name, the visibility, and the status of the document. And I'd say 99% of the time, it was always drafting, regardless of what the actual status was, because that just lowers the defense mechanisms of people that are reading it. They're like, oh, I'm getting it on the ground floor. I can shape this thing. And I would say, and don't, if any former colleagues are listening to this, sorry, it would stay at the drafting stage right until it was ready to be published. Just because that was a hack to build a coalition, and kind of like getting people in an alpha or a beta, they kind of have that identity of being a early adopter.
That's so cool. I think that's I mean, part of that is also just building the safety to be wrong and to put out something that might not be finished. It just makes people more comfortable to also put out something that's not finished, or to give ideas that are half baked and say, oh, maybe this is a thing, maybe it's not, and contribute to those docs. So I really love that. That was so ingrained in the culture early on. And it is something noticeable I see even today with being able to collaborate or feel free to just not be right all the time, even if it's early on in a project's history. So that's really
Yeah,
cool.
later in my career, I really started to tune in and notice psychological safety and how important that was for a team. I was on one team that was the healthiest team I've ever been on. Engineering manager was great about creating psychological safety, and I tried to emulate that as I became a people manager later in my career, especially as I had teams that had people that didn't look like me. For those of you that are listening in on podcast, I'm a white dude. And so that, it's a lot easier for me to find psychological safety in tech. But as a manager, putting myself out there and being wrong, like there were times where I was kind of a little bit wrong, and I would purposely make sure the team knew that I was very wrong, or that like I made a mistake, so that they could see that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be wrong, and be a little bit goofy about it too, right? Like, let's have fun with it. Like I used to joke every time I came up with a bad idea, I'd say something like, well, I have to have bad ideas first before I could have good ideas. And just creating that culture where you're not judging each other, but you're yes-anding and you're supporting each other.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, speaking of this psychological safety and kind of going back to open source as a framework, is there anything about open source that just doesn't really translate to a company format, or did you find that it pretty much maps one to one with how corporations run?
Yeah, I would say that successful companies take the philosophy of open source and the tools of open source, but it's not a copy and paste, right? Open source doesn't have strict deadlines. It doesn't have, conferences that you need to ship by. It doesn't have investor reporting and quiet periods. There's no payroll. There's no HR. And it's largely consensus driven, right? There's benevolent dictators, but it's largely consensus driven. That's not how companies work. Companies need to be able to make money. I'm reminded of the day that GitHub's product org was introduced. So I mentioned that for a while we didn't really have managers. Everyone just kind of pitched their own thing, and everyone just did their own thing. That was great for a while, but at one point we realized that we were building like 7 or 8 different startups. We had our own version of Salesforce. We had our own version of Zendesk. We had our own version of, like, you name the startup, we built it. We had our own chat app. And so the day that the product org was introduced as a taste-making function, we literally went through, and for those folks that are at GitHub, you can find it. It's, I think, issue number 1 in the product repo. And we listed out every single project that was in flight. And it was like 75 projects. And we were pretty small even back then. We used emoji because, of course, we use emoji, and either put like a ship it icon, a snowflake icon, or a speedboat. I forgot what the vocabulary was, but literally went through in the open, showing what we wanted, what we were picking up to do, what we were leaving behind. And open source isn't always good about doing that. I like to say that removing a feature is a feature, and you don't often see that in open source, right? You often see like everyone, like, if you want to build it, great, let's just tack that onto the side. And there's not that taste-making sense. And I think where we see that in corporations, in business, is DRIs, directly responsible individuals, or as in OG GitHub culture, we call them perps, primary responsible person. And I think that DRI that can make decisions, that can be that tastemaker, they're going to beat a committee with a mandate any day because they have that cross-cutting reach. Um, I think, yeah. And then the last part I just say is that, there are limits to openness within a company, right? You have legal, you have HR, you have security, you have those private spaces that you don't necessarily have those concerns with in an open source project. So I would say, you take from open source that async should be the default, but it's not a dogma, right? Import the workflows that work, but don't necessarily import the government's model wholesale.
Yeah, it makes me think going back to communications of whatever you say only matters if the right person reads it. Like, um, and I think one big challenge working for like a medium to large size corporation is finding that path of how to escalate or how to find the person who is your audience. And I haven't worked much in open source, but I imagine like size of the group is a lot of what matters, and sort of in the smaller groups it's easier to propose something because there's only so many people who are reading basically everything. But as you get larger, uh people can't pay attention to everything, so you have to find out how to get your message to the right people.
Yeah, in the book, I talk about Dunbar's number, which is a psychological idea that you can only remember about or have close connections with about 150 people. I think the inflection point for GitHub when we introduced managers, or technically leaders, they weren't managers, was about 250. And I think that played out there of just not being able to keep those connections in your head anymore and not being able to keep those one-on-one relationships. The one pro tip there that I used extensively when I entered a new code base or a new part of the product was leaning into Git and Git history and Git blame and issues and pull requests. And it's a lot more effective to be able to say, the person that last changed this line of code that put this piece of copy on the website was this person. Find them in Slack, find what Slack channel they're in, ask there, then ask in the like general engineering channel, hey, does anyone know who owns the copy on this button on this page? And so I use that a lot on a lot of digital splunking of going through from the blame to the issue to or blame to the PR to the issue to understand why something came to be, see who's commenting on that issue, and then kind of stalking your colleagues almost through their past work so that you can outsource some of that, remembering those connections or remembering who's responsible for what, to systems that naturally capture and expose that process just by how you work.
I definitely use that a lot. And I feel like that was tips that came with onboarding to GitHub, was that way of working, that way of just being able to break down those barriers and ask folks different questions. And I still remember so many anecdotes that you gave from your talk to like onboarding to our onboarding group. And so like we were talking about earlier, emoji to convey what your tone is. I used to never use emojis. Now I use them constantly because it really does help. Like having a URL for everything, and being able to get that to demonstrate what your work is. And so a lot of those are contribute to what you were talking about with like working loudly. And so I feel like there's nuance between working loudly and maybe bragging or self-promotion or anything. And I'm curious, like in your viewpoint, what is the difference between those, or how do you aim towards the working loudly side, if there is a difference?
Yeah, for me, the difference is the direction of the benefit. If you are self-promoting, you are optimizing for yourself to be seen. You're saying, hey, look how great I am. Look at this cool thing I did. I'm so awesome. Please promote me. If you are working loudly, you're optimizing for the receiver. You're optimizing for the work being receivable and findable. So you're narrating as you go in a durable, discoverable medium, right? At GitHub, we had the practice of writing up discussion posts after a big ship about what you learned. And I think for the most part, people saw those as good learning opportunities of sharing information. And it's not because, and this goes back even before when we had Team, which was our internal intranet, we had the same practice there. it wasn't of, hey, look at this cool thing I did, I'm so awesome, but here are the mistakes I made, and here are the lessons that I learned along the way, so that you don't have to make those same mistakes that I did. The idea is that others can build on it, they can catch problems early, they're not resolving the same problem over and over again. It's open sourcing the idea. I toiled through this that you shouldn't have to, not I toiled through this, look how great I am.
That makes sense. And I mean, it does, working loudly does have the same self promo benefits in the way for getting your career development and getting promotions. And there definitely isn't anything wrong about that. But there is definitely that nuance between, oh, am I talking only, am I self focused or am I about the team? So I really enjoy hearing about those nuances.
Yeah, well, I
Uh,
mean, once everything's captured, it's really easy to turn that into a brag doc or to turn that into your annual review. For years, when review season came around, I would go to github.com/polls or github.com/issues and just do a search for everything that I touched in that review period. I'd go through and click through it and build my brag doc off of that. As AI has emerged, I started automating that. Hovers, you can find Reflect GPT. Hopefully that's still working someplace. But the idea behind that is take those receipts that you've been generating over the course of the review period and have AI just make you look amazing. And I think that's really the power of, I talk about how working transparently wasn't intended to support AI, but it's a welcome side effect that once you have all that context captured in a machine readable format, you can put it out in different outputs.
Yeah, huge fan of Reflect GPT. That was what did my reflection this year, and it was amazing because it's hard to talk about yourself.
I love
I
if you're an AI nerd, take a look at the prompt. It's like make me look amazing or something like that. I had fun with it.
That's amazing. I'll have to take a look because it did a great job without sounding overly bragging, but it linked to everything. I was like, man, this is definitely happening next period. So, big
And
fan, big fan.
I don't know if you're around for Thomas, the former CEO of GitHub, had a very funny line right as AI was rolling out around reflecting period about all we're doing is you're writing bullet points, having AI put it into prose, and then the manager on the other side is taking that prose and putting it back into bullet points. So why don't we just send the bullet points across the line to each other and take the AI out of the equation, which I thought was really funny.
That is funny. Um, your book often talked about that async first is more equitable and levels the playing field for different folks that might have other situations going on. And like folks that don't live in the same country and are distributed. And you see in the news every day different return to work or return to office mandates, companies installing bossware and surveillance software. So I'm just curious, like, is there any merit to that? Does async, is that truly just it's good for everybody and these companies are maybe afraid of that? Or is there are genuine situations where this might not be a workable solution?
Yeah, I was joking with a friend yesterday that timing is a skill, and coming out with a book about remote work just as everyone's returning to office is just perfect timing. Um, yeah, so for me, remote work is inclusive work. If you're introverted, if you're a non-native speaker and you work better in writing, if you're a caregiver, if you're in a different time zone, neurodiverse, or just like if you need a second to think before responding, I think that's for me is why I have really fallen in love with remote work. Been working remotely for well over a decade now. When it fails people is when it's a veneer. When you say you're remote, but you're really having those conversations in hallways or conference room or the Zoom after the Zoom where the decisions are really made. That thread, that issue is just theater and maybe just capturing after the fact. So someone that's not in the office is not on equal footing. You mentioned bossware and surveillance, and I laughed a little bit. I know as we were exchanging emails, you shared an article about Microsoft Teams and green dot surveillance and being able to like tell what Wi-Fi hotspot the individual was on, so they know like where in the office they were. The reason I laughed is because one of my favorite features when GitHub moved into HQ 2.0, the current one on Kali P. Kelly Street, we actually had exactly that. On every floor, there were giant monitors, and it told you who was in the office, what floor they were on, what room they were in, and we even had a heat map so you can see where people were congregating. And it was one of my favorite things because I, as a visiting hubber, was like, oh, I really want to go talk to X. I have no idea where their desk is. I have no idea where they're hanging out. I have no idea where the coffee, the water cooler conversations are happening. And so and this was like we had, if I remember correctly, we had motion sensors in the lights. Like it was very, very over-engineered. But the whole point of that was not for managers to be able to see where you were and make sure you're in the office. It was to help remote folks create those opportunities for serendipity, right? The difference wasn't monitoring, it was trust. And I think that that trust, when you see that is in remote work, is moving from input, meaning, time at my desk, presence, keystrokes, the little green dot in Slack, which is more presence theater than productivity, to thinking about the output of my work, right? Issues, PRs, decision, meeting OKRs, objectives and key results, goals. As a people manager, I said explicitly to my team, we have explicit goals. If you can hit your goal in 30 hours a week, great. Right? Like you're not being paid to sit at your desk. If you're not being productive, you should go for a walk. You should put together that IKEA furniture, whatever that's been on your mind. I regularly do laundry or dishes during the day. That it's not about sitting at your desk. It's, if you think about the evolution from the assembly line, where if you were building a widget, you had to be at the assembly line to build that widget. As a knowledge worker, your best idea can come in the shower. It can come at 3 a.m. I get some of my best ideas while walking the dog. And so the idea is to manage against not bossware or presence, but trust that people are doing the work that they're supposed to do and measure them against the outcomes that you agree upon.
Yeah, I say this as somebody who does love remote work and working remotely, but um I do find that there are things that can't be replicated more on that personal connection side. I still can't stand the sort of like the Zoom social meetings and, you know, everyone getting on a call and having fun. It's like it's just totally different. I don't know if I'll ever get to the point where I really enjoy those kinds of like group group call experiences unless it's like a brainstorming meeting or something business related. Um yeah, and I do feel like having a personal connection is is important for that psychological safety, because there's so much that that can get obscured in a digital world. Like, yes, you know, remote first work can be more inclusive, but um, there can be a lot that gets lost with a screen in front of you, whether that's body language or um, whatever it might be. Like, there are things that we kind of pick up on as humans in those in-person interactions that just don't translate over a digital landscape. Um, yeah, so it's tough, I think, kind of finding that balance, but I guess to your point, the perception side of it does help a lot and giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, like when somebody doesn't respond the way that you might really expect or want them to in an async culture, taking a second, thinking like, is this personal? Am I taking this personally? Like, was it meant that way? How did this person mean it? And even if you don't know them or you don't have that personal connection, starting from a place of kind of um like forgiveness first before jumping into that sort of like accusatory standpoint, I find can be helpful.
I'm right there with you. I am anti-mandatory fun time. I am anti-cringe icebreakers. Like sometimes it has its place. During the pandemic, there were lots of Jackbox games and Among Us, and like that was the right thing for the time. I remember early in my career, I would see. I'm not a I'll say not a social person. I'm not an extrovert. I would see very extroverted people that would fill up their calendar with just social calls, and I judged them low key of like you're wasting company time just like just making small talk and like why do you actually get some work done, like the rest of us are working. And at one point I realized that I had that backwards, that in a remote environment that work is work, making those connections, that you want to affirmatively make those social bonds before you need them, so that interactions are not transactional. It's not like, hey, can you approve this PR? And if that's the only interaction you ever have, because that's, remote work can be very lonely and very isolating. But getting to know your coworkers as humans, right? In the office, you'll see them leaving early for t-ball practice, or you'll see a picture on their desk, or you'll see that they have fur on their black shirt, so you know that they're a pet person. You don't get that necessarily unless a four-legged or a two-legged something walks into frame. You don't get that connection, and so going out of your way to make regular social calls and find ways to connect with people outside of work, right? So at GitHub, we had social channels. We had Live Moss for Taco Bell, Peloton, Dogcom, Cat Ops. And, as I would say in onboarding, if your boss sees you posting a picture of your dog during the workday, you're not going to get in trouble. In fact, they'll probably emoji react to that or something like that. That is part of your job, and finding those connections. I had one coworker. I forgot how we got into this. We bonded over the movie and musical Mean Girls, and so we'd have like Wednesday wears pink days, and we joke about that. Another coworker, still mad at them for this. They introduced me to the video game Balatro, which is very, very, very addictive. I was actually just playing it last night. And so we bond over that. And that had nothing to do with work. But then, and this came up multiple times when a work thing did come up, it's like, I'll go back to the Mean Girls one. Hey, bestie, like we already had that connection where we can have a serious conversation with that sense of trust and giving each other the benefit of the doubt and knowing that we're both coming from a good place.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always thinking about how my communication comes across to other people too, um and I I would love to have, like, as I'm talking, like, I'm reading through the book and we're talking about this, like, I've been thinking about how to have some feedback channels of, you know, is my communication understandable, especially when it's like AI assisted. I've gotten feedback from people saying this is really verbose, like this is, kind of unreadable, um and yeah, I mean that's kind of the most feedback I've gotten recently about my communication style. But yeah, I have people on my team who are not native English speakers, and I don't think I'd ever even thought of asking them how how clear my communication is to them, um, until kind of thinking through all this of, um, yeah, like, does it make sense to somebody who's not me?
Yeah, I would take that in two directions. The first is, if you think about how AI works, is it is just the mean of communication, right? It is just the average of everyone's communication. It probabilistically determines like this is what is most common for someone to say after this word. And so if you outsourced your voice, like you sounded like everyone, but you also sound like no one. And so in async work, your writing is your persona, is your presence, is the primary way that your coworkers get to know you. And so, yeah, you can tell, especially from like corporate press releases, executives, like when something is just corporate jargon AI slop versus when someone actually put thought into something. And then the second direction that I would take that, and so spend a lot of time, curating your voice. I have a gist that I keep that has very specific guidance for my own voice. Like, I actually like M dashes. I've been using them for before they were uncool. I like using technical metaphors. I like getting right to the point. And so I keep this gist with me so that anytime I'm in an AI context and I need to punch something up, I can say, hey, grab this gist. This is my voice. Put this in my voice so people know it's uniquely me. And then the other side is longtime hubber John Magic has a great blog post about not outsourcing your thinking. His blog post was in the area of snippets, right, of weekly reporting. And I fell down this same path of, going back to once everything's in GitHub, you can throw AI on it and get different outputs. And I did that for a few weeks for my team's weekly reporting, where I would just throw AI at it and give my boss, here's everything that happened this week. And that was doing a disservice to myself and to my team, because the whole point of going through the weekly review process is not to create the artifact that you pass up, but to actually do the thinking and to do the reflecting. And so if you outsource that thinking, you're outsourcing yourself, and you can't show up for your team in the same way versus when I say, okay, I'm just going to have a deterministic script pull all the activity for the week and spit it out as a markdown file verbatim. And then I go through and curate that. Start seeing those connections of, oh, hey, I need to jump in and help this person, or hey, they're falling off track, or hey, they're doing a great job, they need to shout out. And so thinking about what you outsource, which, the boring stuff, like going back to that type signature, like what's the writing version of a type signature that you might outsource in terms of taking something that's written at one level and writing it for a different level or a different format, or looking at, checking prose, checking tense, checking, making sure that there aren't spelling mistakes. But definitely you don't want to be delegating judgment, voice, taste, decisions. Those still need to be remaining uniquely human. And I actually noticed that. It was interesting. I noticed that a few times. So I used AI very heavily, as I mentioned, not for the writing, but for all the stuff that comes around it. So like I built my marketing site for the book, and there were a number of times where I noticed that again, going back to the AI gets you to the mean. It does what everyone else does. And the playbook for publishing a book is very writer-centric, right? It's, I need you to write a review. I need you to read this. And the value where humans can really add is not doing what everyone else does, right? That produces boring outputs, but thinking like, what actually are we trying to solve here? And how can we come up with a novel way to solve that? And so making things, in this case, more reader-centric was going against the norm, going against the AI, but was a sense of taste and judgment that AI couldn't bring to the equation.
That's, you've talked a lot about your process during this conversation, and I really enjoy especially hearing about the writing process, like where you use AI, where you don't. I'm curious, like maybe we can take a step back and would love to know what you consider the async first stack, to put it in like programmer terms, like the stack that you think is best or most conducive for async work. And is there anything that breaks if like not everybody is fully invested in that?
Yeah, so I think chat in Slack or Microsoft Teams is great for ephemeral communication, right, or coordination, right? It's that incident. It's the we're shipping something. We need to get this out the door. But I also think that in many cases, chat is where information goes to die, right? In the book, I use the metaphor of a camera roll versus like an Instagram post. Right? That chat just has everything. It's a stream of conscious. There's no expectation of polish. There are typos. Information gets outdated. That's the camera roll, right? Versus like that Instagram post that like you curate, the influencer gets the right angle on the lighting, and it's designed for the consumer, right? And it's the difference between, am I writing this for me to get it out there, or am I writing this for the future receiver or long tail of recipients to be able to read it? So chat is for coordination, short term, near term. The next level of that stack would be issues or discussions. I think that's where the actual work, the actual decisions, the actual knowledge is captured. Those are long lived. And there's a expectation that you distill your thoughts into writing, into something that is long lived and that it's updated over time, right? If something's no longer up to date, you post a comment on it, you update the issue, whatever it might be. So that's where the durable knowledge happens. And then meetings. I don't think meetings are a dirty word in the async world. I think they get a bad rap because a lot of corporate culture defaults to meetings. It's hey, let's just jump on a quick sync to kick off this idea, and like the meeting being the starting point of any effort versus the way I think about it as an escalation point. You escalate either because of the complexity of the situation, if it's an ongoing incident, joining the war room bridge to talk through in real time, and also the urgency of the situation, right? If prod is down, you probably don't want to wait for an issue and like that perfect writing. You want to get the information across as quickly as possible. You asked what breaks. For me, what breaks is decisions, right? You see this a lot if teams work exclusively in chat. It's really hard to define what was decided. I like to say that a decision without a URL, going back to the law analogy, a decision without a URL gets relitigated forever, right? You keep going back to what did we decide here? Why did we decide that? And you get this churn. And I think the value of async, even though it might feel slower in the moment, you get better decisions faster because you take time up front. You shift left in your decision making to get rid of all that ambiguity, to chase down all those edge cases, to get a durable artifact so that you're not going back and revisiting decisions again and again because you thought you're on the same page, but because of that informality of chat, there was some wiggle room there.
Man, who among us has not tried to search Slack against the cutoff for context on a crumb of context on decisions that were made? So that is very real. I think that durability is so important and very missing a lot of times, and it's so team by team dependent. So I think you hit the nail on the head of that decisions. Um, Needing that documentation and that durability makes so much sense.
And a quick pro tip there, if you have the Microsoft app, not Microsoft, the GitHub app installed on either Slack or Microsoft Teams, you can right click on any message and it'll automatically open up an issue. And there's like an open an issue button. And I don't know the current state of things, but if Copilot is in Slack or Teams, you can also ask it directly from the thread to open up a pull request to capture what's there in documentation. The number of times when I was responsible for GitHub's intranet, the hub, and someone would come in with a feature request, and in that thread, I'd just be like, "Hey, Copilot, can you just go do this?" It was a fun flex in terms of being user-centric, but also pulling things out of Slack and capturing it and, discussing things in demos, not memos of like, hey, is this what you were talking about? Because like this feature is now in preview. You can take a look at this. Let me know if this is what you wanted. So pro tip, try to use tools if you are using, like chat is great. You should use chat, but use tools to capture that context outside of chat when the time is right.
Oh, that's so cool. I had no idea about the right clicking. I knew you could tag it and stuff, so I am definitely going to use that.
Yeah, and
Heavily
GitHub
now.
has specific tooling called XRef that
Yes.
will also
Yeah.
cross-reference across, but the native GitHub app, it'll pop up a little modal and it'll like have the context and you can like issue, title, body, everything, and it'll open the issue for you.
XRF is my best friend unless I'm in a private channel. And then it's like, oh, you can't do this from a private channel, silly. And I'm like, ah. So I love that you can just right click and create a
Yeah.
issue from that. Amazing. So I know we've talked a lot about AI and like writing, outsourcing thinking. There's a lot of commentary around slop that is thrown around nowadays that typically references the AI generation, whether it be PRs, issues, and whatnot. So in this world where people can kind of be loud for free or like outsource their thinking, which is kind of what you were hitting on. Where can managers and engineers kind of find that signal through the noise, or is that even a problem? Is that even something we have to worry about?
Yeah, you mentioned work loudly, which is a phrase that I use frequently, and it might be the wrong phrase these days, because it's not about volume, right? It's not about how loudly you can speak. It's the whole point of async is that the loudest or fastest to unmute isn't the one that gets heard. AI can generate artifacts. AI can generate more content than humans can consume, but it can't generate your judgment. And so, going back to the idea of weekly reporting, the signal just moves up a layer in the stack. So rather than being this activity happened, it's about curation, it's about taste, it's about understanding what matters and putting it in context that the AI um, doesn't have the ability to do so because it doesn't either it physically doesn't have that context or it doesn't have the knowledge. And so I think trust the artifact still survives in a world in which AI is creating artifacts because they're checkable in a way that vibes never were. It's not like I'm at my desk, you still have that artifact. But for managers, it's more about judging the outcome, not just like, like the industry went through that time where number of PRs was a metric. And then we went through that time where number of tokens consumed were a metric. And so moving beyond those vanity metrics and looking actually at the content of the artifact, to what actually is there, the substance of what's there, rather than just the fact that the artifact exists. So quality over quantity.
That makes a lot of sense. And like a lot of that, I think, is the perspective of the writer, which is great. Do you have any suggestions for anyone who feels overwhelmed by the amount of artifacts that are coming through or how they can sift through that? Is that something that they can also use AI for, or do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, one issue that I kept coming back to every time we made a like communication architecture decision at GitHub was the concept of tragedy of the commons, which is an economic philosophy. The original one is like imagine a field in the middle of a village, and everyone has, I think if it was sheep or cows or whatever it is, right? Like any individual is incentivized to let their sheep graze on the commons in the middle of the square. But if everyone does that, then there's no more, I don't know what sheep eat, grass left for sheep to eat. And so you see that same thing with individuals that optimize locally for their own communication, for their own need to be heard, right? A lot of channels, whether they be the engineering channel, the general channel, the engineering repo, whatever it might be, are a commons, right? And if the individual optimizes for their own needs, you're going to run out of grass. Wow, this metaphor is going nowhere. Okay, we'll back out of this one. But you get the point, right? You need to think about if everyone does this, like how does, I guess it's a matter of systems thinking, right? Like if everyone does this, how does that affect the system? And so for individuals, that's just curating ruthlessly, right? Like knowing, yes, in an open environment, you have access to all this information, but what do you actually need, right? Like what is essential for your job versus what is just interesting? And then also what can you batch and curate, right? Like what, rather than getting the fire hose of notifications as soon as they open up, like what save search can you have that you run Friday at 4 o'clock? Needing to constantly be online, right? Like I even day to day, very tactically, I wouldn't keep Slack open most of the time. I wouldn't keep issues open most of the time. I would finish a task and come to a natural stopping point or hit writer's block and just need a break and then open up Slack and batch a bunch of responses, open up issues and batch a bunch of responses. And so just being conscious of your own information diet, that you're not just kind of, oh, the metaphor comes so full circle now, not just grazing information throughout the day, but being purposeful about having meals and watching what you eat. Okay, I'm not going to continue this metaphor anymore. The last thing I will say as a pro tip, and you might remember this from onboarding, you talked about the fire hose of information. If you're making the transition to a open or asynchronous organization, you will be hit with a fire hose of links. I used to joke that URLs are Hubbard's love language. It's how they show you that they care. And so as you are onboarding or adapting to an open async environment, you're going to feel overwhelmed at some point. You're going to think that the company made a mistake, that you made a mistake. You might get imposter syndrome. And the advice I always give there is don't listen to anyone that didn't say that happened to them. That happens to everyone as they transfer to or transition to an async environment. If they say it didn't happen to them, they're a dirty, stinking liar. Do not listen to a word they're saying. Find a different mentor, find someone else. The company didn't make a mistake. It's just a natural part of evolving to that fire hose information, and you will recalibrate to understand how to process that and get a sense for what you need and what you don't.
That makes a lot of sense. And I love the metaphor of tragedy of the commons. I was trying to rack my brain where I've heard that, and it was from Thinking in Systems, which you were mentioning the systems thinking. So I think it is absolutely relevant in so many layers. So that's really awesome. Um, Awesome. Well, we are coming to the end of our main segment. And just like a personal anecdote, but this book really came at a great time. Like a lot of times I get in my head about staying on Slack or that green dot and things for myself, not because it's being tracked, but because I'm like, oh, I need to rank this up. But like this week, my dad had open heart surgery and he's been recovering in the hospital. So I've been back and forth between home and the hospital, like keeping him company and stuff. And it's been a good reminder. Like I've set my Slack status. I've been like, I am not attending meetings this week. I am going to be away. I'm just async only. And so many people have reached out and been like, hey, I hope everything's okay. And respond at your leisure, but like take your time. And so it's just been a really good reminder, like a lot of these practices on how to stay visible while in the situation where I'm not necessarily in meetings or be able to hop on a call at a moment's notice. So really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. You reminded me of a happy little accident that happened. So over the most recent holidays, I was not going anywhere, so I was working and mostly just hacking on open source and just having fun. But I didn't want my team to see that I was online and think that then the reverse of the green dot, the reverse green dot of like them seeing my green dot to think that they need a green dot. And so I set myself to away in Slack. So I did, even though I was on Slack, no one could tell that I was in like incognito mode or whatever, ghost mode. I forgot to turn it off for like months, literally months. And it wasn't until like May or something when I realized I still had it on. No one said a single thing, right? Like that, it just is really a testament to the culture that, you have, I have a friend that asked to borrow my Flipper Zero to use as a mouse jiggler to get their green dot so they can go out and have a mental health afternoon. By the way, you can expense it. Highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun to play with. Versus us, where like I accidentally had my statuses off for months and no one said anything. So I think that's really the testament of asynchronous culture, that it can really adapt to your life if you can create that level of trust with your coworkers.
100%. Trust is often paramount there, and it is great to work at a place that has that trust and with people you can lean on and stuff. So awesome. Very, very cool. Okay, so moving on to our fun segment. I was proud of this one. So MTV Cribs, like where they're showing their house and stuff and where they live. So I thought we could do overcommitted cribs. So I just really want to talk through, like, if you have your like current or ideal remote workspace, if you can describe that, and then maybe if I'm fancy enough at editing, I can edit in some images of those in post. But I would just love to hear about it. I'm happy to go first to give some time to think. But when I was creating my work from home space, my office, I was trying to think of what's my like, where have I felt the most productive in my life, and the answer was the college library where I went to college, and it was like a very 70s library. Like it was clearly built in the 70s and went underground. It doesn't sound like a very pleasant place, but it was very nice and cozy. And so I was like thinking, okay, I need like wood and like yeah, books everywhere. So that's how I kind of came to my current office, is lots of wood, lots of panel like wood accents, and then my bookcase and stuff with a little bit of whimsy and like fun things thrown in to bring out my personality. But that's kind of what I really liked. But I have a lot of tooling around my desk that I don't necessarily use. So I wish I had things that I need to figure that out next. Like, what is my happy space with? Like, do I need a stream deck? Do I need this like terminal e-ink thing right there? I don't know, but just need to figure that part out.
My like current my current work setup, I really only like need two things, and it's a standing desk and a natural source of light. Um that gets me through the day most of the times. But when we're talking cribs and the most ridiculous thing you could think of that you could have, I would definitely have an on-call masseuse just like standing by. So like, they're like Pomodoro breaks. Like I get like a little neck massage, like, every couple of hours. And I think that would really, yeah, that would really amp my productivity up.
Same. Can we format that? um,
You can. At least you used to be able to.
Erica, format is
Yeah,
our we can
I think I would
expense
blow
things on
my Forma
format.
budget
So,
in like 2 days if I hired a personal masseuse, so
but think of the productivity.
yeah, 2 days a year, there you go.
Yeah, I don't know if there still is. There used to be a masseuse at GitHub headquarters that you could sign up for if you were visiting.
Next time I visit, I'm checking because that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the standing desk. I'm a relatively recent convert to standing desks. I take every meeting standing, and I can't imagine doing it any other way. It just feels a lot more natural to me, especially if you're presenting. I used to be on the speaking circuit when I was doing what we now call DevRel, and so I'm used to being on stage and walking. If you can't see, if you're watching the video, moving around a lot. And so the standing desk has been a big part of my work from home setup. If you're looking for a project, I haven't implemented it yet, but I found on like Kickstarter or whatever, there's a product called the Upski Deski. It is like an ESP32 based IoT device that plugs into your standing desk, and you can then control it using automation. It like just plugs into the Ethernet port of the standing desk. It like a man in the middle's it essentially. And so my goal is to have it sync with my calendar so that as soon as a meeting is about to start, that the standing desk just starts rising up and gets in place automatically. The other big one that has really changed the way that I work, and I'm using it right now, I actually have a teleprompter. And I'm a huge fan of it. A coworker had one, and I was like, "Wow, your camera is great." And I thought I would use it for like a teleprompter, like streaming notes and presentations. I have the Elgato teleprompter, and it just shows up as a third monitor. So you can just drag screens on it. So right now I just have the recording screen on it right now. I can see all of you. I really like it because it's a lot more natural for making eye contact. And then the other benefit there is I actually use my iPhone as my camera. I have tried so many different webcams and could not find a webcam that I liked. And so the idea of just like every time I upgrade my phone, I get a new webcam with the best camera in the world has been a really great quality of life improvement for me. Walking pad. I don't use it as much as I should, but I'm a big fan for any like listen only call. Just walking on the walking pad, getting your steps in, or if you have like an all hands, I usually go to the dog park and take the dog for a walk and call all paws. That was one of my favorite work from home hacks. And the last one, which I think is a flex, is wired Ethernet. And that has helped me. We've all been there where Zoom freezes and it's like, oh, I think it's you. Maybe it's me. Maybe no, it's definitely you because I have wired Ethernet. It's not my Wi-Fi. And that has just been really great for confidence and being able to trust my connection. I don't know that I noticed the speed benefit as much, but just knowing that, your your Zoom presence, your Teams presence, that's your connection with your coworkers, and just really all of the content, the constant between all of those is just really investing in leveling up your persona, just as you would, clothes in the office or the car that you drive or whatever else it might be, of really just being purposeful about how you show up in a remote environment.
Man, I'm taking notes because I want all of those basically. I'm so on the fence about the walking pad because I don't even use my walking or my standing desk right now, but I don't know. This might push me. um,
Oh, and you mentioned photos. I will get you photos. I just
yes.
have a mess of wires in front of me right now. I have a very nice chaos monkey that is our 4-year-old. That every time I get back to my desk, things are unplugged, things are plugged into different places. So I need to get some wires sorted out, and I'll send some photos over. But it's a great way to know that if something breaks, you have fallbacks for your video conferencing when your microphone is just randomly unplugged.
That makes sense. But I mean, you're growing a little cable manager in practice, so they're going to be so good when it comes to remote work on cable management. That's a win, I think.
Exactly.
Well, we will let you sit now, but beforehand, where can folks find you?
Openandasync.com. A book just came out. You can get it wherever books are sold. I write regularly at ben.balter.com, where I just kind of throw thoughts into the void. Highly recommend the book over my random thoughts into the void. It's much more curated. And I'm on Blue Sky at Ben Balter, ben.balter.com. So yeah, looking forward to connecting with folks on the internet. Really, really glad to be here and to have this conversation, and hope folks found it helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. This was such an awesome conversation. I learned so much, and the book is truly fantastic. So, seriously, whoever's listening, please read it. Please go out and get it. It is awesome. So, thank you so much, listeners, for tuning in to Overcommitted this week. If you like what you hear, please do follow, subscribe, or do whatever it is you like to do on the podcast app of your choice. Check us out on Blue Sky and share with your friends. Until next week, bye.